Hello, my name is Chris Henziak, and today I'm shooting a video on how to bend with the Hossfeld Bender. This video is designed to help the students here at Hennepin Technical College in the fabrication class set up this tool and be able to bend with it. A little history about Hossfeld. Hossfeld's been around probably about 100 years. They started in 1922. When I first started welding a long time ago, the first shops I was at had several of these machines, and we used to bend a lot of ornamental ironwork for houses and for architectural work. They are absolutely one of the most versatile benders out there. They've been around a long time. The tooling has been around for a long time. The tooling is extremely robust, and they're very, very adaptable and very versatile. You can bend anything in this bender from flat bar to square stock, round stock, plate, tubing. They have a punch attachment for it. You can bend large radiuses, you can bend tight radiuses. Today, we're going to be bending 1-inch round tubing with about a 14 gauge. Let's talk about some of the reasons why you would use a bender as opposed to trying to bend this by hand. The bender gives you an unbelievable amount of added strength. It multiplies your strength. It uses hydraulic or mechanical leverage to be able to bend material that normally you couldn't bend by hand. This machine that we're going to be running can operate either hydraulically, which is the way we're going to do it, or it can be done manually. If you're going to try to bend this manually, this machine absolutely needs to be bolted down to something really solid, like the floor. We have ours on a cart, and so we're able to run it, because it's cart mounted, we have it set up to be able to run it. Let's talk about setup for a little bit. First thing you need to do is choose the correct die for the job you're going to do. The die we're going to have for this particular job is for bending 1-inch diameter tubing at a 2 1/4 inch radius. That's the tightest radius that this material will take in this particular machine. Tubing differs from pipe, and that tubing is measured on the outside, and the thickness of the tube is determined by a gauge size of the wall of the tube. Pipe is measured by the inside and is basically measured, the thickness is measured by what's called schedule. Pipe dies don't do well bending tubing, and tube dies don't do well bending pipe. So you need to make sure you're using the right material to bend the right thing. If you put a piece of tubing into a pipe die, what normally happens is it's kind of loose. The dies are kind of tight, and they are that way on purpose so that when bending the material is being supported as it's being bent. Another type of tubing that this machine will bend is square. It will bend square tube. I think we might have a 1-inch square tube die, but when you bend square tubing, what it's going to do is it's going to want to compress the inside of the square tube, and it's going to want to compress the outside of the square tube. It collapses it down as it bends. So when you bend square tubing, it's a little different. It's a lot different setup than when you're bending round tubing. Now, when we put the die in this, there's 3 pieces to the die assembly. There's the main die, which is the bigger round die in the center. There's a middle die, and then there's a follower die. The main die is going to get held in by the center pin. Then the clamp die and the follower die, you'll see what those are in a minute. Those 2 dies are held in by pins as well. Now 2 of the dies, the location of the dies gets measured out from the center hole. You count out 3 holes. That's what the die is stamped with. It's stamped with a 3, so that means it's 3 holes out from the center. 2 of those dies get put into the 3rd hole out, and then they're in the proper position. The other thing that we'll make sure is set up correctly is the hydraulics on this tool. Because the hydraulics are only going to stroke so far, and then that's it. So you got to make sure you have it kind of in the One of the other things that's probably a good point, something to point out on these, is you might want to lube them up a little bit, lube up where the pins are, lube up in the center of the dies. it just makes everything kind of move better, and it's less likely to get bound up. When you set this tool up to do other jobs like flat stock or make solid round pins. Okay, so this is the tube that we're going to bend. And that mark that you're looking at right there is 4 inches from the end. One of the things I did to these tubes before I even laid them out was I wiped them down with with a little bit of cleaner, because otherwise the marks don't stay on it. I also marked the line all the way around. It helps me with the demonstration, and it'll help you guys be able to see when we get it in the machine. So the first mark is at 4 inches. The next mark is at 19 inches. The next mark is at 34 inches. And the last mark, way out there, is at 49 inches. The total length of the part is 60. So to get to that length, we take a 120 or 10 footer and we cut it down into 60. The fact that this thing is 60 inches long means you're going to get a square frame out of it that has 15-inch sides. Okay, I'm going to put the center pin and the die back in this. Here's the center pin. And I don't have the power pack turned on for 2 reasons. One, I don't want it to inch forward, and I don't want it to, it's a little easier when it's not running. Now, here's a pin that's going to hold this pusher die. 1, 2, 3. Put it in this hole. Just so you know, all these dies are marked. Top 3. This is backwards in this camera, but so 1, 2, 3. Goes in the third hole. Now we're going to try one more time to bend our part. Pumps on. Here's our pieces. We got number 4. We got the 49 coming in the other way. Now, a couple things to remember when you're bending this material. We just got to pull it a little bit to get it to pass through the die. We're going to give this thing a little bit of lubrication. The other part is make sure the seam is up. That seems to help quite a bit. Everything's looking good. Now we're going to hit the bender. Everything bent. First bend. Backing it up. Backed it out. Got to give it a little push back. So it'll fully release. Get it lined up. Put the level on it. Good and level. Again, hit the extend button. Oh, we got another bend in it. Tracked it. Level. It's in the right spot. Hit the bender. Okay, now we're going to try bending one. One of the things I would say is make sure your tangent line's lined up, and then make sure your seam is always to the top. Let it retract. Make sure that everything's pulled back all the way. And you advance it. Put the level on it. I'm going to hold it level. Make sure the level's level. Everything's level. Make sure the die's closed. Make sure everything's lined up the way it's supposed to be lined up. Get it in. Level back out to be level. All the marks are lined up. And you hit it. Make sure you're level, and everything's ready to go. And one more time. And you got a frame. You got to pull it together a little bit with a clamp, but it's pretty much a bent frame. Okay, so here's the frame that we just bent. It's got a little bit of a space, but for the most part it's right on the money. Now here's another one that I bent, and this one's probably overbent. Some of the corners are more than 90. That's why it gets like that, where it's overlapped. I could take it and pry it and get it to line up and be really, really tight. But you can see that corner right there really looks overbent. All right, so when you come down here to bend these frames, you guys in fabrication classes are going to be the ones that bend this. Realistically, you only have one attempt. So you want to make sure everything's kind of dialed in first. You got a scrap piece, that's a good way to set up, but really we're only going to give you one shot at this. Now, the Hossfeld, if you watched, what it does is it forces the tube into the die. When we look at the other bender, the Pro Tool drags the material basically through the die. It grabs a hold of the end and then it pulls it. There's no right or wrong answer. All these benders got to do it one way or the other. Now, back in the day, when I first learned how to use this tool, I used to bend a lot of frames out of 1-inch round tubing like this. I bent thousands of them. And once you got the machine dialed in, you could just sit there and go to town. Is there faster ways to do it? Absolutely. Now you have stuff that's programmable, they're single setup machines. In other words, they're only going to bend tubing. One of the key features of the Hossfeld bender is that it is so versatile. It can bend a whole wide range of materials. If you're running a small fabrication shop or setting up a small fabrication shop, these tools are absolutely invaluable. They pay for themselves just in some of the bending projects you have to do. If you're doing ornamental work, this tool is really designed for doing ornamental ironwork. And again, you know, if you're doing short run stuff, it does a great job. If you're doing where you got to do thousands of something, maybe this isn't really the right way to go. There's many more options out there that are more automated where you can get. Well, you guys got to see me bend some frames. It's pretty much as easy as it gets. The big part of that is you want to have setup pieces so that you know where your bends are going to be. There's some good documentation out there, both from Hossfeld. They have a great website. They have a whole ton of video on their machine and how to set it up to do other things. One of the ways you can use the hydraulics on here is what's called a feed-along frame. It actually is even easier than what we were doing. It's a little easier to set up, but the machine gets really big when we do that. This setup is designed to be one hit, and it's a 90. And sometimes you got to tweak it a little bit to get it in that sweet spot where it's a 90 every time. And it might take a piece or two to get there. But once it's there, lock it in, and you can run a whole run of these things. I really like the Hossfeld bender. Been using them for as long as I've been a welder. Really adaptable, can bend a lot of stuff. Flat bar, round stock, like I said earlier, square tube, feed along, conduit. You got to take some care with it. It can get beat up, it can get bent. So you want to make sure you're not bending up the pins or bending up the frames. But there's a lot of machines out there that try to duplicate what this machine can do, and there's not a lot of them that actually can. They're just not robust enough. This thing is pretty robust. Hopefully you guys enjoyed the video. See you in the next one.